Good evening and a very warm welcome to tonight's webinar, When You Leave the Life You Know Behind and Start for a Bigger Purpose. My name is Veronica Peters and it's my absolute pleasure to host this webinar for you. I'm Chief Philanthropy Officer with the Opportunity International Australia. And we are really in for a treat tonight as we hear from Elca Grobler. The last weeks and months have been challenging, and I know many of us have had the time and space to think about some of the big questions in life, including our purpose and including the state of the world and what it is that we want to change in our life and in the world. And tonight, Elka is going to share about her journey, and I know it's going to be a very thought-provoking conversation we're going to have. But a few things to start with. Tonight is really going to be an interactive session. So I would love for you to use the question and answer option at the bottom to submit your questions, and we'll get to that later on, but you can submit your question anytime from now on. You can also chat with each other. We have got a great crowd logged in tonight, and feel free to share any feedback you might have, any comments, or introduce yourselves to each other. You can do that in the chat option. For those of you who are new to Opportunity, I'd just like to share a few sentences about who we are. Basically, we've been around for 45 years. Our founder was Australian, David Wiseau, and effectively we are providing loans, small loans for people living in poverty. A small loan can go a long way. Sometimes a few $100s can help somebody start their own business. And a family might use that to feed their children, clothe their children, send their kids to school. 95% of our clients are women. And every single time when they start a business and they repay the loan, the money gets used again, recycled, and more people can be helped out of poverty. 98% of all loans are being repaid. So what we have learned in the 45 years that we have worked to eradicate poverty is that there's three factors that keeps people trapped into poverty besides the need for livelihoods. And these are education, their safety, and their health. And so in addition to our livelihood programs, we also provide programs in these areas to come alongside people. And tonight you're going to hear from Elka, who is the founder of our safety program. And our partner is called My Choices. That's the organization she started. Today, we are helping 6.7 million people to get out of poverty. That's families. So if you multiply it, 6.7 million families, each family about five people. So that's over 30 million people that we are reaching. But the need is so much bigger. And so thank you for considering partnering with Opportunity. But now let me get to introduce Elka to you. Elka has a background in finance and in management, and she holds a CFA and an MBA before she became a global development expert. Elka has received award after award, including the 50 Most Impactful Social Innovative Award. And under her leadership, over 8,800 cases of domestic violence have been resolved peacefully in India, and over 2.3 million people have been educated in the prevention of the risks of human trafficking. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Elka to you. Welcome, Elka. Elka, you are mute. We need you to switch the mute button. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and it's my honor to talk about our work in India.
Thank you, Elka. I remember, Elka, you and I go back a long time, actually. We met over a decade ago when both you and I had small children, and you had a corporate career. And I mean, I remember your kids were under 10 years old when you decided to pack everybody up and move to India. And I have fond memories of the time. I mean, you had so much zest for life, and you still do. But I just wonder if you could take us back to those early days and just share about what planted the seeds in you to move to India, and how long did it take for those seeds to germinate before you acted?
Thank you. So I always say a dream is something that you want to do, and a calling is something that you have to do. I believe that God has planted a seed in all of our lives. And this seed is unique to each one of us. For some, it's injustice. For some, it's education of children. For some, it's health. But we all have a specific calling or a specific seed that's your righteous anger that keeps you up at night. And the seed that's been planted in my life is social injustice, and specifically for women and girls. And after many years in investment banking, the seed finally sort of sprouted. And I think I was ready to follow my calling and do my life's work. And so our family packed up, resigned, and moved to India to work with women and girls.
Okay, so you came to India. So what did you find?
When I arrived in India, I thought I'm going to use my financial skills to help the women with financial empowerment, but not on my own, sort of joining an organization that I can help. And I met with so many women and small women groups. And when you sit with them, after a couple of sentences, they normally open up. And when they started talking, what they spoke about was the abuse that they face at home. And so even though financial empowerment is extremely important, if you can't keep your finances and you are not free and you are locked up every day, that doesn't mean much to you. So I soon realized that for us, we're going to have to focus on domestic violence and not so much the financial freedom. I always say that India can overwhelm you with her love, but she can also destroy you with her violence, especially if you are a woman or a girl. And allow me just to put that into perspective. So it's official, India is the most dangerous place in the world to be born as a baby girl. And this follows her for the rest of her life. So close to 49% of married women in India face domestic violence or abuse. In India, if we look at sexual slavery, 40% of the sexual slaves are actually children. And so these young girls are held captive in brothels where they are beaten every day and raped up to 30 times a day. And the average age of these girls are only 12 years old. And I think for us, the really big thing is that only 1% of these girls will ever get rescued. And so that's what we found, or that's what I found when I got to India.
Elka, these statistics are absolutely confronting. I mean, it is just, you know, as a mother, the thought of a 12-year-old girl, you know, being taken and being, you know, put into sex trafficking. I mean, it is just so incomprehensible. I just wonder if you could just share some of the root causes for human trafficking. I mean, what's the root cause for human trafficking and for domestic violence? Such huge numbers in India.
So a big portion of India's population still implement the dowry system. So what does this mean? For a girl or woman who gets married, and remember many of these marriages are still arranged marriages, the bride's family have to pay money to the family of the groom, either in actual physical money or in gifts that are getting demanded. So this means a girl is actually seen as a commodity to be traded. And so from the day a girl is born, she's seen as a burden, because thousands of families have to go into debt to pay for this dowry, of which they will never recover. And if you add a layer of patriarchal system on top of this, this leads to a multitude of problems and severe consequences in the society. And I would just like to elaborate a little bit on this ripple effect that all is driven through the dowry system and the patriarchal system. So one of the most horrific consequences is what we call feticide. And in the last 10 years, 10 million girls were killed with selective abortions. And so, I mean, to be killed before you are even born is horrific. But not only that, in the last 50 years, 50 million girls were exterminated from the population. And that's so once they're born, they are basically just left to die.
50 million.
50 million in the last 50 years. And so if we move on to the trafficking of young girls, again, the combination of the dowry and the patriarchal system, these girls are seen as commodities to be traded. So 98% of the trafficking that happens in India happens within its own borders. And so these young girls are just seen as commodities and they are traded. And as I said, the average of these young girls are only 12 years old. Now, I have a 13-year-old girl. And so to have this image of a girl knowing what they go through, I mean, that breaks your heart. So, as I said, so these girls are traded, they're seen as commodities, and that's how most of the trafficking happens.
Elka, this is so dark to comprehend. And I just wonder, I mean, I'm sure you would have done research into what goes on in these traffickers. I mean, who could possibly do something like this? What do we know about the mind of traffickers or the approach that they have in India?
So yes, Veronica, we did about 18-month research before we moved from adding to our domestic violence work or program for anti-trafficking. And one of the things that we found is that most of the trafficking is built on ignorance, not indifference. And that's a big difference because the fathers don't actually know that when they let their girls go, that these girls are going to get trafficked. They really think that if they let their daughter go, or 10 daughters from the village, or girls from the village, that they are going to get a better life, meaning they're going to get education, they are going to get work, because that's what's being promised to families. And unfortunately, sex trafficking has become a $10 billion industry, overtaking as an organized crime, arms and drug dealing. But let me just unpack this. Why is this happening? The main reason is if you sell somebody a gun or if you sell somebody some drugs, you can only sell that once. But if you are a brothel owner and you have a young girl, you can sell her 20 times or 30 times a day. And so these bodies are reusable commodities. And so that's why, it's quite unbelievable to think, but that's how that's what happens to these girls. And if you look at the mind of the trafficker, for the trafficker, this is purely a business transaction. The trafficker earns a basic salary to get girls from the village and take them to the cities where they get broken in and then placed into the brothels. And as many of these girls are quite young, by the time they maybe find out that they're actually not going to a school or they're not going to work, they're too young to actually have any resistance, or to try and run away. And you must realize also that in India, if you traffic a girl from the south to the north, for example, she doesn't actually speak that language. So she's completely isolated. There's no way for her to reach out for help.
And you said that only 1% gets rescued.
Yes.
So that is so horrific to hear and to comprehend and to even, you can't really process it. So I just wonder if you can share, what is the strategic solution? What is My Choices doing about this? And how have you been able to train and educate millions of people?
There are a lot of organizations in the trafficking space, very credible organizations that we work with, but they focus on the prosecution of the traffickers. Some of them focus on rehabilitation or restoration of the girls in safe homes. But we could almost not find any organization that focused purely on prevention. And that was the biggest gap. And so we did all our design work on how can we get into prevention, because that actually happens in the villages. So how can we do that? We are now the largest organization in India, working across 8 states that work on prevention. And we realize that the person almost that we have to focus on most is the father, because the father is the decision maker in these families. 80% of India's families still live in rural areas, and the majority of them are fathers. So we really had to speak to the good in the father. And we've built all these skits and comic books and programs to explain to the father, who's most likely a farmer, that we talk about his crop. So we say, your crop, when you plant the seeds, you look after them. Okay, you give them water, you make sure they have enough sunlight. You will never harvest your crop before it's ready. And that's the message. Your girl or your daughter is as treasured. And you have to look after and protect her. And she's the harvest that you are growing. And that's how we work in the villages.
But I mean, Elka, there's over 600,000 villages in India. How do you know where to go?
That's a very good question. So we've partnered, I mean, you say there's 600,000 villages. We've partnered with an organization called Quantum Analytics that built a world-class mapping tool for us to determine which villages to go to first, as we don't have the resources, human capital, or funding to go to all of these villages. Now, you must realize that every organization has a deadline. I mean, our deadlines are just different. For us, our deadline is that every 3 minutes, a girl gets trafficked into sexual slavery, never to be found again. So we really had to make sure we prioritize where we go. And so what we've done across the 8 states that we work in currently, we've trained over 100 field partners that actually go to these villages that we've identified that's most at risk, and they conduct our Safe Village program. In other words, how to keep the village safe. And to date, I know you've mentioned some of the numbers, but we've conducted over 4,300 Safe Village programs. And every month we add another 100 of these across India. And we've reached over 2.3 million people, but we're reaching as many as we can still going on.
So let me just recapture that. Every 3 minutes, a girl gets trafficked under the age of 12 years old into sex trafficking.
I mean, the average age is 12, so some of them will be low. We've found in the safe homes girls as young as 3 years old that have been trafficked, but your average age is now around 12 years.
So that would mean since the beginning of the start of this seminar, I mean, more than 5 girls, actually probably 6 girls would have been trafficked.
Yes.
I mean, you just need to let that sink in. I mean, that is unbelievable. And so, I mean, the fact that you have somebody like Quantum to tell you where to go next, it's a phenomenal partnership, actually.
Yes, we can't work without partnerships. And as I said, this is one of the, not only have they built this tool for us, but actually all our platforms, our data platforms and system platforms have been built by Quantum as a pro bono work for us.
Elka, I'm interested, I mean, it's challenging to measure the impact of prevention, right? I mean, how do you know you prevented something from happening, right? So how do you do this? How do you know that what you're doing is actually working?
This is a very valid and relevant question, and something that we actually get asked quite a lot, because it's quite difficult to measure, which in turn, make it quite a bit hard to fundraise. But as I said, most of the girls that are getting trafficked is trafficked based on ignorance, not indifference. So if we can address this ignorance, the lack of knowledge, basically, that's where a big change then can come in. And I think it's also very important to note that that our work is intergenerational, because in domestic violence, a boy growing up in an abusive home is 5 times more likely to perpetuate the abuse once he's a grown man.
Mm.
So reaching these boys at a very young age is extremely important for us. And this is the only way we will be able to break the cycle of violence.
Mm.
And another thing that we do as an organization that is very important to us is we include men in everything we do. I mean, they are part of the solution. In our counseling work, we will never finish counseling unless the perpetrator forms part of the counseling.
That's for domestic violence.
Domestic violence. And what we've done is, for example, most of our campaigns, we actually include men. So recently we had a Respect to Protect campaign where we had all the national Indian cricketers that was part of that campaign. It was called Respect to Protect. And that campaign won the best social media campaign for the empowerment of women. And one thing that I just really want to mention why prevention is so extremely valuable. If you think about it, for us, it's like standing on the rim of a pit. Once the girl falls into the pit, it's slimy, it's dark, and it's very deep. You almost never get her out. And if we can stand on the outside and almost like form like a fence with banners and trumpets and protection and people, we can prevent her from falling into that pit of which she will never come out. So that's why prevention for us is key to breaking so much of the violence and the trafficking.
I can see that. I mean, the prevention, I mean, that's a great picture of the fence. Is so much more powerful than 1%, the chance of rescuing 1%. I mean, you really kind of, it's so much harder on the other side. Elka, let me ask you another question. I mean, you are a white South African woman, and I find it's intriguing. I mean, you've built an organization that is, you know, has leaders that are all Indian women. And so I'm just wondering, how did you do that? How did you come into the culture and win everybody's trust and find acceptance as white South African? How did you not come in as the white savior with all the answers, right?
I think almost the biggest attribute to that is that I actually didn't have any answers, you know, or I didn't have any solutions, because I actually came in thinking I'm going to work on finance. So, you know, I think part of that blessing was almost my ignorance, you know. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a social worker, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor. I don't speak the local language. And I think on top of that, I didn't know much about cricket. I mean, I actually don't even know if I know a lot of now, but I think it was my lack of answers initially that almost turned this into an advantage. So when we started with a peacemaker program and trying to say, how can we get behind these locked doors? How can we get inside these homes? The only way we can do that is if we work with the women and the girls inside the homes. And that's how we built the peacemaker program. And the only way we can build it is if we actually work alongside them to see, you know, how can we do this? You must realize for these women or these peacemakers, they are local women from the community. We wanted them just to be literate because we needed to do a 4-week training for these peacemakers. And for those that were so keen to do it, but who wasn't literate, they would actually bring their daughter to the 4-week training to literally just help them. And so I think, you know, the fact that we had to come up with solutions with the women around us, you know, was one of the biggest contributors that, like, I just almost, you know, started forming part of the local team.
Yes.
And then, you know, on the second question of how did we build confidence on the ground, you know, again, I was so out of my depth and comfort, you know, in this new culture, this new country. I had to be dependent on people around me to build my choices. There's a saying, it says, a different world cannot be built by indifferent people. So, you know, over time, I almost got surrounded by people who were strong, who were visionaries, who were doers. who were able to give up their comfort to come alongside and actually go into these uncomfortable places and do uncomfortable things. We have a word for the people working within My Choices Foundation, and we call them dragon slayers. It's become part of our DNA. And
love it.
It basically means it's someone that's willing to get up every morning and go and slay some dragons.
Beautiful. I love that. So inspiring. Tell me, Elka, has COVID-19 changed the situation on the ground? Do you anticipate girls and women being more vulnerable as a result?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, obviously, COVID-19 has had global consequences all around the world. First of all, for us in India, more people are going to die from famine than they are actually going to die from the virus. That's the first reality. And then the second reality is we call it the pandemic within the pandemic. In the first week, we've seen a 30% increase in domestic violence in the homes. Now, for these women, they have to choose between going out on the street and getting killed by the virus, or staying inside their home and most likely being killed by the perpetrator at home. And as I said, there was, just from the cases we know of women who were willing to go out, there was a 30% hike in domestic violence. The National Child Sexual Abuse Helpline received 92,000 calls in the first 10 days of the lockdown. So we are sitting with a pandemic within a pandemic, and as an organization, we have had to change the way we work to really get alongside these women and girls.
Yeah. Gosh. Elka, there's a lot of people in Australia and around the world right now who are considering, changing careers, leaving what they've always done behind, and starting something new to serve the greater good in one way or the other. What advice would you have for people who are considering a radical change? How to use their resources, influence, experience in the best way?
There's an acronym that I really like, which it says SHAPE. So your shape as a person is it's spiritual gifts, but it can just be your gifts and talents, your heart, your ability, your personality, and your experience. And it's when you combine these 5 things, that's where you find the spot where you can make the most difference. And over the years, we've had photographers, cinematographers, artists, narrators, script writers coming alongside us to help us build the organization without leaving necessarily their day job, but actually adding to our impact. As I said, we've had all our system platforms and the mapping tool built by Quantium, and that equates to more than $100,000 in pro bono work. So we need all the skills and talents and abilities that people can bring to the table. But that can be from your corporate place, or your environment, or where you have the most strength, and then partner alongside us, and that's when we make the biggest impact.
Well, there's lots of questions coming in. It's my last question before we got to do the question from the audience. My last question to you is, Elka, you have won a lot of leadership awards, and yet knowing you, it's not about the accolades. So I'm wondering, what gets you out of bed these days? Where to from here?
There's a quote by one of my heroes, Brian Stevenson, and it says, we have to be willing to do uncomfortable things, to do inconvenient things, and that's only when the world changes. So I have to admit, it's not always easy, the work we do. Our work deals with immense pain and suffering, and in the process, our hearts are broken repeatedly. And there's this deep, I call it almost a melancholy that sits in our soul, almost every day. Some days you think the problem is so big that you're overwhelmed to address it. But I always say that courage is contagious. And that's contagious within our team, but it's also contagious within the women we work. And I look at it almost as a coin. On the flip side, on the one side you have courage, and on the other side you have hope. And it's this hope, you know, that gets us going and gets us out of bed.
Thanks, Elka. Let's go to the question from the audience. Here we go. What was the hardest lesson learned as a pioneer that you wished you had learned earlier?
Sure. I mean, you know, for every pioneer, it will be different, you know, depending on which industry you're in or which context you are in. For me, in India, you must realize it's the most dangerous country, as I said, to be born a baby girl. And a system where we deal with so much human rights, you know, with girls and boys. And so, I mean, for me, the hardest lesson was I had to learn that my grief can't overwhelm me. Initially, I thought my grief and my sorrow is a weakness, you know, meaning that I'm not equipped to do this work. You know, how can there be so much grief? And many days you feel overwhelmed, and that's for me and the team. And it took me a long time to realize that I have to learn to harness and treasure this grief, because it's this grief that then propels you to become stronger and almost you know, get you to have more impact. And as I said, hope and courage is different sides of the coin. And I just want to say something that we realized, you know, we're not going to win this war by killing what we hate. We're only going to win this war by protecting what we love. And it's out of love, you know, and courage that we do this work.
Wow. That's profound, Elka. I mean, I think in our culture, it's so countercultural to see grief as something to embrace as a driving force rather than something to escape from. So thank you for sharing that. Let's go to the next question. How do you do what you do and not get burnt out?
I wish there was an easy answer. The reality is that burnout is quite a reality for us as a team, as the whole team. And there are definitely seasons where some of us are stronger and some of us are a little bit not weaker, taking more strain. But as a team, we give each other grace. We give each other hope. We give each other courage. We all have these seasons, and we have a lot of capacity building amongst our team to, you know, to work through this. And that's all I can say. But our minds weren't designed to see so much greed and lust and evil and heartache and pain. So we really have to protect ourselves also.
I hear you. Oh yeah. Have you ever felt your personal safety or the safety of your team members were at risk?
Definitely yes. More so my team members than myself, because I obviously spend a lot of time in the counseling centers or crisis centers and with our trafficking work, but not as much on a daily basis. But we've had times where we will be in the counseling center and the perpetrator will bring his brothers or uncles, or when they would be a group of men that try and intimidate us, and they will, as they walk in, sort of just show us sort of, you know, we have knives and chili powder with us. And you know, so the team face more of that than I do. With the trafficking work, there are certainly villages which I am not almost allowed to travel to because of the risk of abduction. So yes, but
Yeah.
but as a team, we've been fortunate that we haven't had serious incidents.
Okay, and there's another question, I guess, that follows on from here, which is, do you work with the police? And another question, do you work with the Indian government? And I guess the Indian government question is in to protect the families from the consequence of the dowry.
So realize that the dowry system is actually illegal. Okay, so it's not supposed to happen, but it happens everywhere. Then in terms of your question with the police, is just as much as men are part of the solution, for us, the police is part of the protection that we have to work with. So in all the communities that we work, we have a very good relationship with the police in that community. It's actually come to the point where the police will, all their domestic violence cases are actually sent to our counselling centres that we deal with. And we've actually also become the preferred trainer of all the police in terms of how to sensitize them on domestic violence. You know, what do you do if a woman comes into the police and she's completely beaten up? How do you deal with that? So we're very fortunate that as time goes on, we're forging really good relationships with the police.
Thank you. There's another great question. I'm combining two questions that have come in, and there's like, how do you balance your inner calling to help women and girls with the needs of your family? And somebody else phrased it in, what was the cost for your family of your calling?
I don't think any calling comes without sacrifice. And I mean, for us as a family, you know, we moved with 3 young children to a country where when we landed in Hyderabad, it was the very first time that myself and our 3 children, you know, was in Hyderabad. So there's definitely a cost and there's definitely a sacrifice. But I also think that the exposure that our family has been given has transformed our lives forever. Mm-hmm. We live out of a deep sense of gratitude. And that gratitude changes the way you live. It changes the way you think. You know, so if I could go back and somebody say, you know, we've been there 9 years now already, and say, even after all of that, if you could re-choose, you know, the 2 paths, I will not change it for anything in the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Now, I love the next question that has come in, actually. The person, feel free to see me afterwards, and I will help you out. What would you do with a donation of $1 million?
Well, if that's a real offer, then please tell me who that person is, so that we can get in touch. We are at the moment, as I said, working across 8 states in India, and we are just adding states and adding counselling centres. Our yearly operational budget is actually close to $1 million, but all our programs and projects have been planned, you know, for a year or 2 years in advance, you know, already where we're going to go, which states we want to go into, our training and everything. So $1 million will, you know, give us a year and double our impact and double our reach, because everything is already, you know, planned. We know where we want to go and we know how we want to double our impact.
So you've got a model that is ready to be scaled up. What we really need is we need to have more resources to come alongside you so that we can reach more and more girls to be protected from falling over the edge. Yes. It's as simple as that. So if we cannot, if we have a $1 million donation, that would be great. But if we collectively as a group can raise $1 million, that would be amazing as well. So no matter what size of donation you can make tonight, please consider giving towards this amazing, amazing ministry. Let's go to one more question. If you could say one thing on behalf of the ladies you serve, what would it be?
Oh, I would say thank you. The thank you is from the thousands of courageous women and girls that have stood up themselves when given the tools to stand up for themselves. Very early in my journey, I was at one of our centers in the old city of Hyderabad, which is really a difficult place to be in. And as I walked down the stairs, there was this young girl. I mean, she had a full burqa and I could only see her eyes, but I could see from her proportions it was a young girl. And she had a friend with her, which was the translator. And she was told in the center that I'm the founder. And she came to me and she just clinged to me, like she wouldn't let me go. And she broke down in tears and her whole body was just sobbing and she wouldn't let me go. And she was only 17 years old at the time, but she's already had 3 children. And so her first child she got when she was 13 in a forced arranged marriage. And all she said the whole time was, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's the first time she's been given the opportunity to speak to someone. It's the first time that somebody is believing in her. It's the first time that she has a way of escaping the violence. And we have a safe home. And on the walls of our safe home, there are all these beautiful drawings and clips that we've put up. And it's actually drawn by the children of the mothers that stay at the safe home. And everywhere in this drawing, somewhere captured in the drawing are these words, thank you, thank you. And so it's thank you from the women and girls we save, but from us as a team, it's also thank you for the opportunity almost to be able to bring peace into these violent places, the privilege of being able to do that. And I mean, I just want to thank my team also for, the work we do every day, of getting up every day and slaying dragons. They are the true heroes.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Elka. I know we haven't gotten to every question yet. I've tried to kind of get to as many as we possibly could, but I know that we have each taken away something that'll stay with us from this seminar. I know personally for me, I know the image of the dragon slayer on the top of that fence is what will stay with me. And I just want to, not be complacent. I just want to come alongside you and be one of your Slagandreas, because I think the world needs more of that. And I'm just really hoping that we'll all see that we can play our part to advance your cause. We just really want to thank you for what you do. And so you may be asking, what is it that we can do right now? And I just want to give everybody some practical ideas of what you can do. First of all, please stay informed. It is so important that we not remain silent. Share what you have heard today. This session has been recorded and will be made available to you, so you can share it with your networks and with your friends and with your family. So you can bring others along on the journey of opportunity and of my choices. And we are hosting another webinar on the 12th of June, very different. This one is going to be a cook for opportunity. And so you can be, while you're at home, you can, with your family, cook up a storm with some phenomenal chefs and at the same time raise much needed funds for opportunity. And finally, what I would really like to encourage you is you can give to our crisis appeal. And in the chat box, there is a link that's going to come up, and you can click directly there and you can donate there. People living in poverty need us more than ever before. This is a crisis of phenomenal dimensions, and we have an opportunity to help people. Please donate there. And if you want to give to Elka's work specifically, please do get in touch with me, and either with myself or with one of the relationship managers that we have across the country. And we can help you strategically align your philanthropic interests with Elka's phenomenal work. So I just want to say thank you again to watching us here tonight. Thank you, Elka. Do you have anything that you want to leave us with to share?
I think there's just one last sentence that I would like to say, and that's that evil can only triumph if those of us who can speak and stand up keep silent. So we need everybody to come alongside on this journey, speak up, stand up. We all know what's the right thing to do. And thank you so much, Veronica, and the Opportunity team for allowing us just to share of our work. It's a real privilege. And to all the dragon slayers out there, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elka. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and we will see you again soon. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.